Branch office. I am North Dakota's trash queen of glam, geek, and gore, and I'm here for the now. I seem to have messed up the scheduling, and we're going to get the reconnection, so there's probably going to be some buffering at the beginning. So we'll chat a little bit before we get into the actual discussion and let YouTube figure its life out and all that kind of stuff. Let me go ahead and zoom us in a little bit. Our lovely backdrop. Yes, so hello, welcome to this Wednesday's. It seems that I have messed up the timing, and I need to check the other ones. I'll do that after this live. It says that it was scheduled for 8 p.m. Central Time. I don't know what I was doing that I ended up scheduling it for 8 p.m. Central Time. I must have been... I wanted to make sure it was going to be scheduled after Dion's live, and so I was thinking about Central Time and Eastern Time and used the wrong time zone. So I'm so sorry, and I'm so sorry that we're spinning and we're buffering. I don't know why this has become like a common thing that happens every single time where it has to like spin 20 times and then it gets itself figured out. Hello, CJ, how's it going? Welcome. So we are here for Pride Chat, but we're going to take a little bit of time. We're going to let people, especially because I put the wrong time down when I scheduled it, we will give people a little bit of time to get the notification and to show up, and also to hopefully this dumb spinning, buffering bullshit will figure itself out. So we're going to take a few minutes just to kind of let people arrive. While we're doing that, I'll show you some goodies that came today. So you thought you were getting out of makeup news because you were coming to a Pride theme chat. No. We're going to talk about makeup too to get us started. So I decided to order from Ulta because I do love the blush products from Juvia's Place. I like Juvia's Place, and I haven't been... A lot of their stuff has been like complexion and like bronzer, and it's been a lot of like cream and liquid like blushes and bronzers and stuff like that. But they released these two blush palettes, and I know I like their blushes, their powder blushes, and they had these collections, and the colors just look really, really cool. And so it's this long rectangle, and here you can see this is volume 1. Hello, Alex. Welcome. Here is the kind of red pink, and then we've got some more brown with some berry down here at the end. They're kind of like in little quads. I mean, you can use any of these together, and especially if you're like me, I don't wear blush. I wear 6 blushes. So these all pair well together, and these are meant to be a little bit more of a darker kind of color story, where we've got, you know, these kind of lighter pinks, and then we get into some fuchsia, some red, a berry, and then some browns. Work is killing me. Thanks for these. You're welcome. I'm glad we could do that for you, Alex, because yeah, work is kicking my ass too right now. And so I'm just doing what I can. And then we have volume 2, which is the lighter collection. And this is some beautiful, beautiful pinks, and then we get some kind of peachy pink, and then here are much more like neutral lingerie kind of colors. So we've got a couple like beigey colors with maybe a little bit of pink, a little bit of peach kind of in there. We've got a pink that's kind of a shimmer. We've got this kind of very muted light berry kind of color. And so I think these are beautiful, and they are volume 1 and volume 2. I hope that they decide to do more volumes of this. I mean, I suppose it depends on how popular these are. But as you'll notice, everything is very like red, pink, and then some brown, because it is meant to be. So it's called the Blushed and Bronzed Blurring Pro Palette. So it's clearly meant to have some shades that can also be used for like bronzing, contouring. But all of the blush shades are very pink, red, wine, berry kind of colors. There's no orangey, peachy kind of thing. So I'm hoping that that means there will be additional volumes as well, because I do, let me see if I have, I know I decluttered some of the Juvias, but I think I still have a couple of them. Of the duos, if you remember the Juvia's blush duos, I did really like these. I did keep this one, which is kind of a, it's pink, but like leaning a little bit more towards lavender. Although now that I look at this, I'm like, do I need to keep this now that I have these duos? Kind of similar, but definitely much more on the lavender sort of side. So I think I will still keep that one. And then I kept this one. So this is the volume 4. And then here is the volume 5. And this is kind of a red coral. Yeah, so we've got some Juvia's Place blushes. And then their shipping is super, super fast because guess what I got today? The Huldra palette. So my Blend Bunny order, I ordered from Blend Bunny and from Singe Cosmetics on Friday. Blend Bunny is coming tomorrow. I may do a live to show that off. Maybe I'll do like a lunch break live or something. But we have the Huldra. This arrived today. This looks so pretty. We know I love green. I love these kind of foresty greens. These purples with it are absolutely gorgeous. I had all of the Juvia's Place eyeshadow palettes for quite some time, and I recently decided, for a while, when she wasn't releasing things quite so quickly, I was kind of a Juvia's stan. I found them through Jackie Ina, and I had most everything for a while when they were just releasing like a few palettes a year. And then they start branching out into all the different categories. And I do still have some Juvia's that I love, but I just don't use them that often. So I need to revisit them. And I thought maybe if I have these blush palettes, it will encourage me to do maybe like blush and highlight and eyeshadow and pull out some of my Juvia's products and do kind of like a full face. All right, so we are about 7 minutes in, so I think we've given people a little bit of time to show up, and I think that hopefully they will continue to filter in. I hope nobody got super misled. I hope nobody set like alarms and things. I'm bummed that I accidentally scheduled this for 8 o'clock, and so that's a little bit of a bummer. Let me go ahead and change the chat to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I always forget to do that. There we go. All right, so we're switched over. Last thing before we go into the Pride chat, just to give people a couple more minutes, I'm kind of excited. I did a little depotting thing. I decided to, we talked about in the Made by Mitchell Declutter, I had the Build Foundation, and I had that, that shade that was way too dark for me, and then I had the one that was too light for me that I mixed together to kind of create it, but I said that I was going to depot those, and so I did buy some little bottles from Amazon. And so this is my mix up. It's maybe still a little bit dark, but it's much closer to my skin tone. So I depotted everything that was in the darker one, and then I just kept adding the lighter one and shaking it up until I felt like it looked like a pretty good approximation of my skin tone. So even if it's a little dark, it's definitely much closer. And then the bottle came in a little set of 3, so I decided to depot a couple primers. I had the e.l.f. Mint Melt Primer, so I went ahead and put that in this little bottle. And then I had the Believe Beauty Radiant Primer, and I put that in here. They were both in like squeezy tubes. And I don't mind squeezy tubes, but I just thought these looked cute. And these are 2 that I haven't reached for. I haven't been reaching for at all. And so I was like, you know what, let's find a new spot for them to live. Let's put them in new bottles, and maybe that will inspire me. I'm gonna put them on my little spinner that I have over here, where I have a lot of my primers, and see if that inspires me to pull these primers out, because I do like them. They are good primers. I just, for whatever reason, have not. I did order another pack of 4 of these. I like the little colorful ones. You can get them in white. A lot of like basic components. Sunset Makeup has used these. OMG Cosmetics used to use this style of like airless pump bottle. So we may depot a few more things. I haven't really decided. I do have this. This I've had for a while. This is the Primed and Ready from Collection Cosmetics, which I think isn't around anymore. It's a UK-based brand. Reviving and Anti-Fatigue Illuminating Primer in Warm Apricot. And I think that you can kind of see it at the bottom of the bottle. It's that kind of color with kind of like a peachy golden metallic. And I think that if I depotted it, I might be more likely to use it. So I may depot that one, and I'll have a couple just like, I'll keep a couple of the empty bottles in my back stock. I like to have little jars and bottles and things, you know, like if a shadow breaks, I like to be able to put it into like a little jar. Sometimes I'll repress it, and sometimes I'll just keep it as like a loose pigment. You know, any of those kinds of things to try to, keep those, be ready for any eventuality. All right, we've let people kind of filter in. Hopefully, people will continue to show up. Hello, Janet. Like Janet just popped in. So hopefully, since I screwed up the scheduling, hopefully people will show up. But we are going to be talking about kind of a little bit of history around queer activism, and specifically talking about this sort of like when people say the first Pride is a riot, like what that means and what the history was a little bit before that, and then how that influenced politics and everything going forward. And so, of course, because of that, we're going to be talking about Stonewall. So most people have at least heard of Stonewall, the Stonewall Inn in New York, and so we'll talk a little bit about that and where that comes from and what happened and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was scheduled for 8, and now I need to go back and check the other ones, because I think I don't know if I just messed it up in my brain and I was thinking about Dion's time zone instead of my own. I think what might have been is I was like, oh, maybe I'll schedule it for 8 because then I'll have an extra hour. And I was like, no, by 7 o'clock I'm ready to be done with work. So I think I just need to go live at 7. So I think we will change those. So I'll have them changed for next week and the weeks after, so that it's set to 7 o'clock. But let's get into it. So before we talk about Stonewall, we should talk about some of the things that led up to it. There are a couple of... My last one is still private? What? I think I've got comments on it, though. I'll have to check it after this live, but I'm pretty sure I've gotten comments on it. But it's hard to say because YouTube is always fucking with me. So... YouTube is just always on its bullshit. But so I will definitely check that to see if that is still private. I did set it. This happened to me for a while, and then for a while it was better, where like it always, if I do a live on my phone, it always goes to private right after. And then for a while it wouldn't let me change it on my phone. Like I would go and change it on the phone and I would save it and it would say that it was public, but then I would go back later and it wasn't. It was still set to private, and I would have to go to a desktop to like change it. I don't know why YouTube does this. I don't know why this is the thing. It is so frustrating. The whole like top comments versus all comments, this whole thing with like privacy settings, because nobody else that goes live experiences that. Dion, she sets it to public. When she's done it set to public, it converts to a video, it's public. I don't know what's going on. I think some of it may have to do with the fact that like once it's processing to become a video, and so I think sometimes that processing blocks if you change the privacy. I don't know why that would happen, because it wasn't doing it for months and months and months and months, but now it seems to be doing it again. So I will double check. You're probably right. I just was filled with hope. Such a sweet summer child. A hopeful idiot. But yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about some queer history. So before we get to Stonewall, now there are a couple of movies about Stonewall. There are 2 of them that are specifically called Stonewall. One of them is more recent. That one, terrible. Terrible. It is such a whitewashed, white, cis gay male savior narrative that is so terrible. It's just so dumb, and it's not the history at all. And both of these movies have kind of this like cisgender white gay that like shows up in the middle of, 1960s Greenwich Village and goes to the Stonewall Inn and meets some of the characters or whatever. The other Stonewall has a little bit more, it focuses more on kind of the drag culture, and it's got some really fun actors and things. It still isn't a perfect sort of retelling. It really doesn't capture it fully, but you get more of a sense of the houses, and you get more of a sense of the like trans and non-gender conforming people that were a part of that sort of history. But the newer one that's in the like mid 20-teens, I think is when it came out, that one is terrible. If you want to watch it for the narrative or for the feel good or whatever, you do you, boo boo, but don't think that that is in any way reflective of the actual history, because it's just not. Neither of them do a great job, but the earlier movie called Stonewall that features, usually the cover art features these like 3 drag performers, it's usually a little bit better. But let's talk about before that. So before Stonewall, before there was a riot and people were sick of it, the reason why Stonewall existed and why it was raided and why it led to the riot is because for a long time in most of the United States, it was illegal to serve liquor to avowed homosexuals. I always love that. That's a term that's fallen out of use that I want to bring back. I want to bring back avowed homosexual because I think, I don't even know what they thought that meant we were doing, but I love the idea of being avowed to my queerness. I love that. I think that's fun. But yeah, it was illegal to sell alcohol to avowed homosexuals. And so a lot of these early gay bars were run by the mafia because they were already doing illegal shit. Hello, Finny, that one grunge kid. Welcome. And so since selling liquor to queer people was already illegal, the mafia's already doing illegal shit. So they would run these bars, and they weren't like, we're going to do this great thing for the community. It was like, oh, this is an activity that's already illegal, so we can take advantage of that. We can pay off the cops so that they'll leave us alone. And then if they hassle the patrons, that's for them to figure out, right? And so if the mafia would like miss a payment, then the police would come and they would raid the bar, and then a bunch of people get arrested and outed and shamed and fired and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of police harassment, there was a lot of police brutality, and so these underground gay bars that were run by the mafia, they weren't necessarily a great place for people to, you know, come together and to organize, but it was one of the few places that people could go, and they were kind of these underground centers of queer life. Now, there were earlier, happy Pride. There were earlier groups before the Stonewall Rebellion happened. There were some groups, and I recently saw a post that referenced a group that I had never heard of. And so I need to do more research. So we're not going to talk about that one, but that one I thought was really interesting. And I think I screenshotted it. Life is chaos right now. So I'm drowning as fast as I can. So I think I tried to screenshot it so I would remember to go back, but it was talking about, and it said that it was the first like trans activist organization, and they were dating it to 1895, which is phenomenal. That's one that I haven't really heard of. The ones that I've heard of most prominently in the United States were the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. Now, the Daughters of Bilitis was a lesbian organization, and then the Mattachine Society was a gay rights organization that was founded in 1950. And that's the one that I want to kind of focus on, because that one is the one that really kind of sets the tone for pre-Stonewall. Daughters of Bilitis, as far as I know, from what I understand about it, is I think that they did more like community organizing. It wasn't as much political or rights based, I think. It was more based on building community support and safety and helping people who were outed and all those kinds of things. Can someone catch me up on why we're having a history lesson? It's low-key interesting, though, because this is Pride Chat. So if you check out the title of the video, and I think I maybe put a little description in, on Wednesdays during June, we are going to have Pride Chats. So we are going to be talking about this. There's a couple that are history, politics related. There are a couple that are film related. And so each Wednesday in June, we're having one of these Pride Chats where we talk about queer stuff. And so for today, we're talking about the history of trans and gender non-conforming people in sort of gay rights movements and things. So in 1950, the Mattachine Society was formed. And the core of that group was very leftist, very progressive, very influenced by Marxism and socialism and all of this kind of stuff. But of course, 1950, we also are dealing with, nationally, we're dealing with McCarthyism, we're dealing with the Lavender Scare and the Red Scare and all that kind of stuff. And so there's this very conservative movement. And so there were conservative members within the Mattachine Society who were suspicious of the group's ties to communism, socialism, Marxism. However, most of the time, the conservatives of the time didn't even understand what those terms meant anyway, and it was just an excuse to witch hunt people and to blacklist and ruin lives and all this kind of shit. Joseph McCarthy, maybe someday I'll do a whole video just on Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism and J. Edgar Hoover and all that kind of shit, but fuck those people. I hope they're burning in hell, is what I'm going to say. I don't believe in hell, but if there is a hell, I hope it exists for those kind of people specifically. And so In 1953, these more conservative members had kind of taken over the Mattachine Society and really kind of directed the philosophy and the activities of the group. Because from 1950 until that kind of takeover in 1953, their sort of assertion, although it was very underground, it was very organized in ways to like, it was very like cell hierarchy and like keeping things very underground so that if somebody was caught, they couldn't lead to other people and all this. It was very underground. It was very trying to protect everybody. And so, but the idea was that queer people or homosexuals, queer doesn't really come in as an identity category as much at that point. It was still very much a pejorative term at that point. And so basically they said that homosexuals should be a protected class, that they are experiencing discrimination, that they are separate, and should be thought of as separate and thought of as a class that deserves protection, that deserves equal rights, all this kind of stuff. So again, the conservative members of that group, this is important to pay attention to now, because if you read my post that I put on my post tab about what's going on with the organization in Bismarck, that's really in some ways what's happening with that group right now, is that they are kind of catering to some of the whims of the more conservative white gays in the community, and I don't deal with that. I'm here to shame queer conservatives, and I'm happy to do it. Hello, Dion. How's it going? Welcome. And so originally it was this idea of like, we should be a separate protected class. In 1953, when the more conservative members took over and really kind of took control of the Mattachine Society, it switched over to, they really tried to work with like scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists and psychoanalysts and like medical professionals, to say that queer people were just normal, right? That was part of it, to just say that, not that we're a separate class, not that we're marginalized. They took any of that like stuff that could be identified as sort of socialist or Marxist and tried to push that to the side and said, we need to prove that people are normal. And what that kind of morphed into is it turned into the Mattachine Society really kind of worked under this idea that queer people were just normal people, but they had like some sort of sickness or affliction, that somehow queerness was something that was to be pitied, that was to be thought of as an affliction that couldn't be helped. And they really felt like the way to do it was to kind of approach it as like, we should be pitied, take pity on us, and, you know, really kind of treat us as if we're just like everybody else. We just have this sickness. And so it was very apologist. It was very conservative. It was run by these more conservative members. And so they would do protests and things. But if you read about the protests that the Mattachine Society would do, I mean, they had dress codes for their protests. So they would go and they would protest, but there was no yelling. You couldn't act out or do anything. Men had to wear suits. Women had to wear skirts, like skirts or dresses. You had to be very like business appropriate attire. No t-shirts, no jeans, no casual, excuse me, pretty girl, no like polo shirts, no casual clothes. You had to be like full business attire, dressed up. And then they would very politely march with their little signs in a circle or whatever. And it was very much trying to say like, we are just like everybody else, but we have this affliction, and so we should be pitied. So you can imagine the people who were on the more progressive side were like, what the fuck is she doing? Like, what is this? What is going on? And so there wasn't, and so it was really, and so it goes without saying, if that's the kind of idea that you have to be this sort of buttoned up business professional, you have to try to appear as if you belong in straight society as much as possible, trans and gender non-conforming people were not welcome at these protests. And so even though it was meant to like advance queer rights, gay rights, I mean, at that time, they mostly used the term gay, and that becomes part of the like splintering that happens, is that lesbians were part of the group, but they didn't use like gay and lesbian. They just said gay rights. They didn't use the term queer. They didn't talk about trans people. It was very much like, we are here for gay rights. And like, yeah, it's an umbrella term and includes everybody, but we know how that works, is that sometimes umbrella terms are good for certain things, and it helps us organize our ideas and organize identities and things like that. But when it comes to like arguing for rights, it never works out. It never works out to just do an umbrella term and be like, oh, it'll catch everybody else. And I think we're finding out now, certainly over the years, this is not new, but we're finding that when we do those umbrella terms, people are not actually swept up in this wave. Usually it happens to be the most privileged get the most attention and get the most rights and the most benefit from these actions. So, but that's what they were doing. They were arguing for gay rights. So trans people, gender non-conforming people, you know, the real butch lesbians, really feminine men were not part of that movement because they weren't even allowed to be there by their own community. And so this kind of goes on and on for, you know, the better part of 2 decades, because if the organization founded in 1950, and then this conservative majority kind of takes over in 1953, we don't have the Stonewall riots until 1969. Dion, gonna put you on the TV. Well, good. Yes, lay down, get some rest. I'm glad that you're here, but definitely don't wear yourself out trying to keep up with our chat. Yeah, we're just glad that you decided to pop in. So in 1969, we've got this, all of this stuff is kind of working at the same time, right? Like the official, I have a question, but should we wait till the end? No, go ahead and pop it in. Yeah, let me know if you've got a question. I'm trying to like not get distracted all the time, but especially if there's questions about the stuff that we're talking through. Some of the other conversation I might kind of ignore until there's a good breaking point, but if you have questions about the stuff that we're chatting about in our Pride chat, definitely leave it. So yeah, this is kind of a good time because we're about to get to the transition point. So go ahead and let me know what your question is. Because yeah, then we're going to get into what happens at Stonewall and how Judy Garland kind of is responsible for the rights and privileges that we have today. Not really, not Judy Garland herself. But yeah. Let me see. I'll wait for your question to come in. Speaking of Judy Garland, that's part of this sort of like underground gay language before Stonewall and before people were more open. If people haven't heard the term friend of Dorothy, that's a little bit of underground parlance that you could slip in if you were an avowed homosexual and you were looking to see if somebody else was an avowed homosexual. You might tell them that you were a friend of Dorothy. I don't know the exact origins. For some reason, Judy Garland, the gays just loved Judy Garland, loved her. And so Judy Garland played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And so that became this sort of like underground language to say like, oh, are you a friend of Dorothy? And so if somebody was uninitiated, then they would be like, what? Who's Dorothy? Or they might be like, yeah, Dorothy Jones, I'm friends with her. And they'd be like, okay, not gay, or at least not gay enough to like actually talk about it right now. And so, but that if somebody else would, they'd be like, yes, I am a friend of Dorothy. And then you could kind of connect and make connections that way. So that's where if you hear friend of Dorothy, it comes from Judy Garland, and Judy Garland is going to be important for Stonewall. Okay, so that society in the 50s, of course, it was far from perfect or all-inclusive, and I'd take issue with them. Wasn't that a first good step historically speaking, though? Absolutely, yes, absolutely. People feel all different kinds of ways about this. I filled my grammar, but I think I definitely understand what you're saying. The Dorothy history is freaking wild, too, the FBI nightclubs and all that, yeah. Yeah, it is definitely a good first step. I mean, I think that, you know, there's always organizations that crawl so that someone could walk, so that someone could run. And they did make some inroads. There are, you know, I think people really kind of like to debate about their tactics and things like that. And some of it is, you know, it's something that it's like, okay, it worked at the time, but we can see why we needed to move past that. Because they did make important inroads and they were an important like stepping stone on the path, but they also said that all gay people were sick. So like, I think it's fair to acknowledge that they were important historically while also saying like, maybe not the move, maybe not the move. to just be like, gay people are sick and pathetic. You should be nice to us. And so I do. And so, of course, it is a little bit of privilege, right? Like now I'm here 60 years later, 70 years later, whatever. And it's easy for me to just be like, yeah, what they did was terrible. And in some ways it is, because it does kind of sell out your community. But it is, I do also understand that it is kind of that stepping stone, that kind of building block. But I think it also shows the limitation of, I like to call them the get-along gays, because they've never gone away. Those Mattachine Society type people, those people have never gone away. And they do sometimes get things done, because they do sometimes get straight people who would otherwise not support queer people to support some queer things. This happened a lot with marriage equality. We'll kind of jump ahead for a second. Like with marriage equality, if you think about when they were really kind of trying to get marriage equality passed and recognized and all of that, when that was like the focus of the activism, God, all we did was talk about fucking marriage for like 10 years or whatever. And I used to, I don't know who said it. It was some joke that I read and I agreed with it, because they're like, what happened to being queer? Because being queer used to mean that you didn't have to get married, you didn't have to have children, and you didn't have to serve in the military. And they're like, and now that's what we're fighting for. Like, what is happening? And I'm on that train. But when they were fighting for marriage equality, if you looked at like who they were featuring in the sort of ads, propaganda materials to kind of support gay marriage, it was always very cisgender, very heteronormative looking, very upper class looking, and mostly white people. There was no like gender non-conforming. I mean, if they showed a lesbian couple, like one of the lesbians might have kind of a short haircut, but there was no butch realness going on. They were really just trying to show like, oh, we're just like you. We're just like you. Yes, it's a man and a man, or it's a woman and a woman, but we're just like you. We pay our taxes and we live in nice suburban neighborhoods, and we're mostly white, so you don't have to be afraid. Like it was very that. It was very apologetic, and I call that the get-along gays, where they're just trying to appease people. They're trying to take the sex out of your sexuality. And so they were trying to like just paint this picture. Hey, Dawn, how's it going? They were trying to paint this picture to just like make people forget that like gay people fucked each other is kind of it. Like they were just trying to be like, oh no, don't think about sex. Think about our property taxes and think about this nice house that I'm posing in front of. And, think about those kinds of things. And don't think about the fact that queer people have sex, or that our sexual identity is important to who we are, and that everybody deserves sexual fulfillment, and you shouldn't have to like feel that sort of all that kind of stuff. All that activism around gay marriage was so cisgender, so normative, heteronormative, so white mostly. You might get a light brown person in that. They weren't putting a lot of darker brown people in there, and certainly not a brown couple. Like that was almost unheard of. Like it was almost better to have an interracial couple than it was to have like two black people for a queer couple in the gay marriage stuff, because it was so whitewashed, and it was so just like toned down to try to bring in allies. It was disgusting. I wasn't alive during all this Mattachine Society and all this stuff, but I'm like, it was still going. It was still there. All the get-along gays, they're always around in every movement and every time, because they were there doing the gay marriage, same-sex marriage propaganda. Even changing it to marriage equality. And I do understand some of the reasons why you would say marriage equality versus like same-sex marriage or gay marriage or whatever. But they also were just trying to get away from any like gay, like same-sex marriage. They would say that, but you couldn't say gay marriage. If anybody said that, it was like a deep faux pas. And it's like, well, if somebody wants to say gay marriage referring to themselves, they should be able to do that. But no, you can't do that, because you might remind the straight people that this was like gay stuff. And that kind of impulse is really what dominated those organizations from, 1953 until 1969. Now, 1969, we're in the Greenwich Village, and things have kind of started to change all over the place, right? We have the invention of the pill, which leads to the sexual revolution. We've got hippie culture. We've got a lot of changes to our sort of cultural movements, musical movements, pop culture movements, all this kind of stuff. Everything is sort of shifting in a direction anyway. Hello, Fabulous Joe. Welcome. And so at that time, it's 1969, And so queer people are starting to get a little sense of like, oh, things are changing, things are becoming different. Maybe we don't have to be quite so apologetic about who we are and what we do and how we live and all and who we love and all that kind of stuff. And wasn't open talk of sex taboo amongst straight folks too, though? Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver having two. Yeah, for a while there was, because there was that, like, you couldn't, Lucy being pregnant on I Love Lucy was scandalous. And so there is, there was so much repression among straight people too. But they also they also were allowed a lot of privileges that queer people were not allowed. So I'm not giving them an out because they weren't able to as openly talk about sex. And especially after the sexual revolution, that became a big driver of a lot of the discourse within feminism and, all of these kinds of things. So people are getting a sense that things are changing. Well, in the Greenwich Village, people are organizing and people are talking. Queer people are sort of drawn to that as kind of a mecca, but it's still the same situation where it was legal to sell alcohol to avowed homosexuals. And so that's apparently my new, so there's gay and then there's avowed homosexual. And so people were still going to these underground bars. They were still being raided. They were still being harassed. They were still experiencing police brutality. Well, in 1969, Judy Garland, the famous Dorothy, of which people were friends to indicate their queerness, Judy Garland passes away. And so it was for queer people who really saw her as a certain kind of icon and who saw her as a character, the Wizard of Oz as a metaphor for queer people going from this very sepia toned world into this world of full technicolor and, the fabulous ruby slippers and the Emerald City and all this kind of stuff. Queer people saw this as this amazing metaphor. And sure, Dorothy at the end goes back to Kansas. Queer people were like, catch you later, bitch. We'll just hang out here. We'll hang out here with the Munchkins and the and Glinda and all the like colorful fun people. We're gonna stay here. And so there was a real kind of sense of loss within the community. And the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, one of these underground mafia run gay bars, got raided by the police. That within a day or two. I don't know if it was the exact day or if it was the day after. It was right around there. And people just had enough. Whatever this cultural moment for them, it just became a time where people just said, we're not going to just keep getting harassed, keep getting pulled out of here. We're not going to continue to be the victims. And so people started throwing bricks and they started, pushing back against the cops. And there was a few days of rioting in New York City in the Greenwich Village area and like standoffs with the police and, arson and all this kind of stuff where people just said, fuck this noise. We are so tired of this. We are not going to put up with this anymore. If you're going to come for us, you're going to come for us and we're going to fight. Like, we're not just going to lay down and take whatever kind of beating you think you're going to give us. If you're going to beat us, we're going to beat you back and we'll see who wins. And it really, hello, Valerie, welcome. And so that was really a turning point where it was, and the first Pride Parade then, the first like official Pride Parade in New York City, I don't remember if they called it Pride or what it was. It was just a celebration of the anniversary of this Stonewall riots. And if you look at a lot of the archival footage, it'll tell you some of the story of some of the people that were involved in this. And it's not the whitewashed version that shitty movie from a couple years ago told us. It wasn't like these cis white twinks that were like, we're going to get some justice. Like, that was not who it was. That's not who it was. Because the more like respectable gays, the ones that, were cisgender and wanted to be heteronormative and wanted to play along, they had the Mattachine Society. The people who were going to these bars were often people who were, homeless or living with their sort of chosen family because they had been kicked out from their families. It was a lot of trans people, a lot of gender non-conforming people. There are a lot of people who didn't even necessarily understand trans identity or maybe wouldn't have identified as trans people, but were living full-time in the persona that they had chosen, that they had created. And two of the main people that come out of this are Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. Now, Marsha P. Johnson, there's a great documentary, I believe it's still on Netflix, about the murder of Marsha P. Johnson and her kind of cold case that lingered for years and years and years. Also, if you've seen the documentary Paris is Burning, a lot of the people that are in that ball culture are sort of the next generation after the people who, fought in Stonewall and established then some of these big drag houses, like for the ball competitions, like the House of LaBeija and things like that. And so it kind of traces this lineage, but it was a lot of these outcasts. It was a lot of trans people, a lot of gender non-conforming people. Because if you think about it, the Mattachine Society drew the kind of people that had the least to lose, because they were already living a cisgender experience. They were willing to look very heteronormative. They were willing to play the game, right? They were willing to be the get-along gays. And so then there were the people who either couldn't play along and be the get-along gays, or they wouldn't. They just chose not to. They said, fuck that. I'm not going to play this little game and try to, put on this performance that you think I should have. I'm not going to do it. And so it was those were the people who were at the Stonewall Inn when this happened. And so Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, there's a really famous clip that is used a lot from that first anniversary celebration, where Sylvia Rivera is kind of getting some heckling from the crowd. And she's like, you need to respect people. Like, I've lost my home for gay rights. I've lost my job. I have been beaten. I've been harassed. I've been assaulted for gay liberation. And she's really kind of talking about the fact that in this sort of uprising, it exposed a lot of these tensions that all of a sudden, some of these people from the Mattachine Society were like, oh, look over there. They're getting some action, things are happening because of that. And so they wanted to kind of wiggle over closer, but then they were like, do you guys have to be quite so queer? Do you have to be quite so visible? Like, yes, let's riot, but quietly. And so it's exposing this tension of the fact that the people within the queer community that have the least to lose often will sacrifice the more marginalized in order to try to make progress. That's what the Mattachine Society was all about. Again, you did call me on that, CJ, and we have to admit that they absolutely made important historical strides, but also I think we have to contend with that legacy of being willing to sacrifice the more marginalized members of our community for some perceived benefit. Because the benefits that came never affected those people who were sort of left out of those movements. And that continues to happen. We always say, it'll filter down. I mean, it's sort of like the queer politics version of trickle-down economics from Reagan, which is it never fucking trickles down. That's the point. It never fucking trickles down. And it certainly isn't going to trickle down to the most marginalized, the most progressive, the most queer, the most out of the box, the people who want to they want to have glory holes in fucking public and all this kind of stuff. And it's those people are part of our communities too, the leather bars. If you think about the movie Cruising and the kind of communities that organize around leather bars and bathhouses and all that kind of stuff, the get-along gays are well, we can't acknowledge that, and that's not part of what we're talking about. And it's yeah, it absolutely fucking is. It absolutely is part of our communities. And in fact, those businesses often are integral to queer communities. And yes, there's a sexual element to them, but they also provide help and support and, services a lot of times for people who are affected by these raids and these public outings and all these kinds of things. And so it's absolutely about acknowledging all those parts of our community. And so anytime we start to leave out, it's always well, we'll come back for you. That's the nicer version, because the earlier versions were much more you are not welcome here. And the later versions, it's sort of melded into this sort of well, we still want your support and your money, but you can't really, we'll come back for you. So if we're talking about legislation, we're not going to include gender identity in there. If we do sexuality first, then we can come back. and do gender identity. That happened a lot in the 90s as well. Very much of like, if we're doing anti-discrimination laws and we're trying to get that passed, and we're trying to advocate, the get along gays would say, well, we should leave out gender identity. I know things are bad for the trans people, but we understand we'll get gay rights first. We'll get gay and lesbian people taken care of, and then we'll circle back. Those white gays never fucking circle back. That's an important part of our history as well that we need to acknowledge, is that most of those people who advocate for those kinds of policies, they don't fucking circle back. Once they've got their part of it, they're done. They're done. And so, sorry, I'm looking for a straw. I had a straw here. I mean, I could just drink it out of the can. I feel much more demure when I have a straw. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that tension between the more conservative, apologist, placating sort of activism, and then the more progressive, much more tied into the real, like, full lives of queer people. And so, excuse me. And I do often, so I should say, when we talk about terminology, one thing that's sometimes difficult and has been difficult historically with queer movements is that not everybody understands all of the terms the same way, right? So there are some people, especially like boomer gays, a lot of them hate the term queer. They hate it. Like, they may recognize, like, oh yeah, there's this thing called queer theory or whatever, but they were like, I was called a queer on the playground and I fucking hate that word. I want you to call me gay or whatever, and that's fine. And then there are people who, you know, they just want to say gay for everything. They don't want to be, they'll be like, oh, the alphabet soup and or they'll do the jokes where it's like LGBTQIA, LMNOP, blah, 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 and all that. And they'll just kind of like dismiss the fact that so many letters have been added to it. And that's part of that, like, get along gay sort of philosophy, is that at some point, once it's not about them, for some people, they kind of lose the interest, they kind of lose the motivation, which is not okay. You can tell where I fall on all of this. And so there's a lot of that versus the more, I don't want to say inherently sexual, because I don't think that that's inherently sexual, but I think being willing to acknowledge that your sexual identity is about sex. It's not just about sex, but it is about sex. That kind of puts you in this other camp that's willing to be more marginalized and willing to sacrifice some of that respectability for authenticity. So maybe that's what I'm kind of trying to get at, is that there seems to be this tension between respectability and authenticity. Because of course, even those boring, uptight, conservative sweater set gays, they're fucking too. We know that, right? Like, we know they're fucking. Their sexual identity is about sex as well. They just are trying to cover it up so that straight people will be nice to them or whatever. And that's been a big thing when we talk about, like, allies in the community that I think is important to keep in mind, because that's what a lot of those people, they will make these arguments. And I've sat in so many meetings, and let me tell you, I am a loud, mouthy drag queen. In some ways, I'm not surprised that I got fired by that group, because it's one of the most conservative, like, communities in North Dakota. And so I'm not surprised that there's a bunch of these, like, conservative white gays who fucking hate my life or whatever. But, because I'm willing to say that sort of shit to people. So, like, I'll go to, like, a meeting, and I will go to, you know, our college group that I was involved with for many, many years. Even after I was done with college, I was helping to, like, organize their drag shows and stuff like that. But, like, our college group, some people would, so the thing that really kicked off, the one that I think of, is that somebody in the group had organized an event during coming out week. So Pride is in June, and then in October, we have National Coming Out Day, which is on the 11th. So a lot of campuses will do events for Coming Out Day, or they might do Coming Out Week. And so during Coming Out Week, this person, he had organized an event at a local coffee shop where people would just show up and people could just ask questions or whatever. And they called it Coffee with the Queers. And they thought that was so cute or whatever. And it's a cute little clever title or whatever. And then somebody came and they're like, well, what if people don't feel comfortable coming to an event called Coffee with the Queers? And people were like, what do you mean? And it was somebody who was coming to our group, and they identified as an ally. And that's where we had to have the discussion of like, you don't get to self-identify as an ally. Ally is a thing that the people within the community that you're trying to support will call you if your actions match up, right? So like you can say, my goal is to be an ally. I'm trying to be an ally. But you don't just get to be like, I'm an ally of X group or whatever. That's not how it works. It's not a crown you put on. It's not a sash. It's not an email list that you sign up for. Like it's not something that you pick. You make your choices and you let your behavior like drive how you behave and how you engage and how you interact. And people within that community will look at that and they will evaluate and be like, that's an ally. Okay. And so that was the thing that one of the times that I got mouthy is because this person said, well, as an ally, like I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable coming to an event, excuse me, pretty girl, called Coffee with the Queers. And I said, well, if your allyship depends on queer people having to change how they self-identify, then maybe you're not an ally. Maybe you're not ready to be an ally. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good to acknowledge the truth of the situation, right? But like, if I have to change how because I came out as gay, and then my sexuality and in some ways my gender identity, I just like the term queer because it is kind of up in the air and it's malleable and it's weird and people don't understand it. And that's how I feel about sex and gender anyway. So like, it's like if I have to change how I identify to make you comfortable as a cisgender straight person, but you're an ally? You're an ally. You're an ally. You're telling me how I have to like describe my own identity and my own experience living in the world, but you're an ally. I am confused. You're what? You're what now? What? What? And so I felt like there was a segue that I was going to make, and now I'm and now I'm trying to remember. So we talked about like the post, and but yeah, so as I try to regain my train of thought, we've gone off the tracks, as always happens. So after Stonewall, things start becoming more in your face, becoming more progressive minded. And then of course things start to splinter a little bit, right? And so there are different groups and different factions, which I think is probably for the best. It allows people, it does take away some of the like group bargaining power, but it allows people to organize in different ways that don't leave out parts of the community or to focus on their own identity. And so I think there's some positives to it, there's some negatives, but it starts to like grow out and it starts to branch. And so that's where we start to, a lot of times they were talking about gay rights, gay liberation. And then eventually somewhere in the 70s, then people started to be like, oh, we need to acknowledge lesbians. So a lot of stuff was gay and lesbian, whatever, gay and lesbian liberation, gay and lesbian resource center. So gay and lesbian. Eventually people started adding, they're like, we should talk about bisexuals too. Bisexuality and biphobia within queer communities could be a whole other video. I don't identify as bisexual or pansexual, so I don't necessarily have the best kind of perspective to present some of that. But, that was something that certainly was faced with, and still is today. There's still TikToks today of people like being mad when bisexual women who have straight boyfriends like come to Pride, like you're not allowed to be there. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Of course they're allowed to be there. If you're a queer person and if you support queer people, you get to be at Pride. I would much rather have a bisexual woman with a straight cisgender boyfriend than have queer conservatives. They're the ones I think we should make uncomfortable at Pride. If you vote for this kind of bullshit and then you want to come to Pride and be like, I'm entitled to a fun time with no complications. No, the fuck you're not. No, the fuck you're not. Fix your vote, bitch. Fix your heart and fix your vote. And then we'll talk about how you can come over here and like benefit from our work and our effort and our blood, sweat, and tears. Shouldn't anybody who supports everyone's lifestyles be accepted? Yeah, I mean, I think that if people are open and accepting, but also I think that especially now, like we're living in a time where when people say, oh, I'm open and I'm accepting, what does that mean? And that's where I've got, like, I'm becoming a bit of a menace at prides because, again, loud and mouthy, not surprised I got fired. I'm not afraid to go up to like churches at prides and be like, tell me specifically what you are doing for queer people in your community. Because I love that churches want to come and they'll be like, we're open and accepting. And it's like, okay, but what does that mean? Because I understand that churches, I know that they exist as nonprofits. They don't pay taxes. That's all bullshit. They should pay taxes. But like they don't, because they're these community organizations, they do all this shit or whatever. But it's like, what are you doing for queer people? Because you are still a business. Because when people come to your services, they're supposed to give you a tithe. They're supposed to give you 10%. They're supposed to give you some sort of like offering. They pass that plate. Some churches pass it multiple times during a church service. So like you want somebody to come and give you money. What are you doing for queer people? Because you just coming and saying that you're open and accepting, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because if you're not taking some of that money that's coming in and using it to make things better and safer for queer people in your community, then I don't want your fucking free hugs, Deborah. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, what are you actually doing for queer people? And if it's just saying that you're like accepting and you're whatever, I don't have time for that. I don't have time. I don't have any time at all for that. And so, I mean, some of that is my religious trauma speaking. Hello, Gabby. How's it going? Hello, hello. That nebulousness, that fluidity still confounds me sometimes. And I mean about me. I'm pretty much okay with that. Queer, yes. Gay, guess so. Bi, think so. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I'm at. Like sexuality, we'll maybe get to that at the end. Remind me to talk a little bit about like the sexual fluidity. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I just use whatever shorthand for whatever context in that moment. Yeah. If somebody refers to me as gay, I understand that like I just appear to be like a cisgender dude. So I get it. Like that's not my identity. That's not my experience. That's not my journey. But if somebody sees me and they read cisgender dude, I don't really care because I'm a jeans and t-shirt. I mean, yes, I have the lesbian math teacher hair, but but I'm not putting out a very like traditional, like typical non-binary presentation. And nobody of any identity owes anybody any specific performance of gender or of sexuality. That's bullshit. But I understand, like I believe that, but I also understand that what I'm putting out gets picked up and they're like, cis dude or whatever. And so I'm like, I get it. And that's why I like queer, because then it starts a conversation of like, well, what does that mean? Because two people who use the term queer are going to use it very differently and mean different things and have different experiences. So absolutely, girl, what is up? Free hugs from a gay. I would rather have free hugs from a gay than from a church. Honestly, absolutely. Hi, Gabby. I never knew or understood the history or knew about the different lifestyles growing up. I grew up in a pretty sheltered community. Yeah, and I think... and that's like in terms of the language, it's not until I graduated high school and moved to Jacksonville, Florida, that I met and was around different sexualities and people. And that even some of the terminology, because I know that, and I know that you come from a good place, Alexandria, but like even like lifestyle is kind of one of those words that's a little bit, it's in kind of a gray area because lifestyle indicates like choice, right? Like it indicates like my lifestyle is I want to live in the mountains and have an outdoorsy lifestyle, and then like my lifestyle is I like to have sex with men. No, not exactly. And I understand that like you absolutely meant no harm with that. So this is not to be like shame, but it's just one of those things of like, as we think about language and the evolution of language, one of those things to keep in mind, that like, yeah, and that's the thing is I always, because I know that like, and now Deanna and I, we talk so openly and she'll just ask me shit or whatever. But a lot of times when we were first getting to know each other, she would always like preface things with like, I don't want to misspeak. Like, is it okay if I ask you this kind of stuff? And I was always like, yeah. Because the thing is that like, I feel like, at least for me, maybe this isn't true for everybody. Maybe for other people, it's a little bit more loaded or whatever. I think that for most queer people, we can figure out pretty early if somebody has good intentions or bad intentions when they're asking questions, when they're saying things. So like we can tell if somebody is there because they want to like cause a fight or they want to like get in our face about it, and they're trying to like do it in a way that seems polite, but we know they're there with bad intentions, versus somebody who's like, I just don't know. Like, I don't have experience with this. I don't really know. And I have time for that all day. The people who are just like, I just want to know. I want to learn more. I might misspeak. And then we can talk about that, right? It's the ones who come in and they're just like, oh, what about this? And you can see the little like, and like, we're pretty good at sussing that kind of stuff out. Hello, Mama Champagne. Thanks for the hello. Oh yeah, not my identity either. Gender non-specific, yeah, for sure. Why bother? I love all clothing. I've made overalls into a dress and it looks sick and it feels so good. I love that for you. Yeah, I love that. I'm what I there isn't really a perfect litter for me under the under any of the umbrellas. And so I sort of refer to myself as a lazy gender anarchist, because, and I've also said that I'm sort of uncomfortably non-binary, so that way then I can, because non-binary is at least something that a lot of people have heard of. And so, but I call myself a lazy gender anarchist because I'm all like, burn it down, but I'm also like, but I want to wear comfy clothes. So like, I'm a drag queen and I do all that kind of stuff, but then in my off hours, I just want to wear comfy clothes. People are saying hello to Mama Champagne and Gabby. I don't want to misspeak, absolutely. The performative part, exactly. There's a poem by C.A. Conrad where he says, I have no time to auction to be your pansy mascot. Exactly. I love that. Works awesome in winter for walks. My boyfriends love all of what I do, so that works for me great. I love that. People are saying hello, hello, hello. My dad does a bit of that, and I don't know what the boundaries are when he shit talks his dead dad. Oh, I wear that fucker in public. Yeah, same terms. I just forgot that. Yeah, and so I think that's the thing, is that people use terms differently and they mean different things. And that's, I think I said this earlier, but that's why I like the term queer, and that's why I use the term queer. Audition to be. You're okay, no problem. That's why I like the term queer, is because a lot of people, they encounter that and they're like, but what does that mean? And I'm like, well, let's sit down and have a conversation, because that's what I want. I want to have this like discussion about, sexuality is like a range. And with gay, when I used to identify just as gay, I felt like people have a box, right? Like, we're always trying to categorize things. We're always trying to make things simpler and faster or whatever. And so people create these boxes in their head of like, oh, the term gay, I know what that means. And I don't want to necessarily have to then try to live up to, or have them sort of putting me up against what their understanding of gay is. I would rather take a word like queer that is much more fluid and doesn't have that sort of clear definition. And then they try to make it, right? They want to make one. So then they're like, well, what does that mean? And I'll be like, let me tell you, let's talk about it. This is my experience of queer. If you ask 5 people, if you put 5 people in a room and their identity is queer and you ask them what it means, you're going to get 17 different definitions. Like, that's what that word is. And it's about like fluidity and flexibility and things like that. And so that's why I like it. And even for gender identity, because I've been all over the place with kind of trying to figure out what my gender identity is. And the only thing I've really kind of figured out is that I look at the term cisgender and I'm like, ew, not that. So like, I definitely don't identify as cisgender, but I don't know what the combination, there doesn't seem to be a letter. There doesn't seem to be an identified, like clearly defined identity that fits. And so like gender non-conform, I like that one because I prefer that almost to non-binary, the idea of gender non-conforming, because for me, it almost feels a little bratty, where it's like, you will conform to your gender. And I'm like, no. And I love that. I love that. So gender non-conforming, non-binary, I'm here for it. I love that. So let's see. Oh, the box for me is, you know what I mean, but my box is gay for you until I tell you what I got going on. I say that because I don't pick one. Yeah, and I think, and some people, it's not about the label, it's about connection, and they don't, everybody's. And that's one of the things that when I talk to different groups and things, and sometimes I get asked to go to like talk to classes or different things. I used to go every year. The person that I knew that was in the, she was in the PT or OT. I can't remember. I think OT. But she taught at UND, and she would have me come to one of her classes that was all about diversity for medical professionals and just answer questions and things. And I would tell people that what's important is to listen to people. Like, that's the most important thing, is that don't just try to get like a box, again, like a checkbox of like, oh, what is this person? Now I understand it. Because for some people, if they say that they're gay, they might be at like stage 5 of identity development, which there's this whole, I always forget the name, but it's this identity development for gay and lesbian identity that goes through like 6 stages. And stage 5 is where people are like, they want gay everything. They want gay music. They want gay movies. They want everything is gay. They want to wear rainbows everywhere. They want to do the whole thing. And then they get to 6 where it just becomes incorporated in their larger identity. And so you might get somebody who's in stage 5 where like that's, to them, that's the most important part of their identity, no matter what context they're in. For some people, they might be like, well, yeah, I'm gay, but I'm here to talk about my bad knee or whatever, you know? So really kind of letting people kind of fill in for you like how this identity fits into whatever they're there to see you about. You've always been a nonconformist in most things. That is true. That is true. I feel like that applies to a lot of the viewership. Yeah, I do. Your vibe attracts your tribe, and I attract people who, you know, like to test boundaries and like to you know, have unique, interesting identities and experiences. And I enjoy that. I love it. But yeah, so we were talking about how, you know, in the 70s, then they started talking about like gay and lesbian. It became more of this like representation of like there were more people. And then they're like, okay, we should talk about the bisexuals. And then they were like, we should maybe include the trans people, right? Like, gender isn't sexuality. And that's one thing that I've seen a lot, and a lot of the like discussions that come up. And now there's the like reprehensible people who are like LGB, no TQ. Fuck those people. Let me say that loudly. I will say it until I'm cold and dead in the ground. Fuck those people. The people who say like LGB, we should just break off, and T and Q, they can fuck off or whatever. Gender and sexuality are not the same thing. But if you don't think that they live like on the same block, you're fucking crazy. They're all intertwined. They're not the same thing, but they feed into each other. They're like all this kind of stuff, and it's so complicated. But so eventually what I'm getting to slowly, long story short, too late, is that then as identity started to come out, then we started to get this acronym of GLBT. That was the first time we started like putting all these letters together, was GLBT. And then eventually it switched to LGBT. And when I was younger and when I was in undergrad, I didn't understand it. And I was starting to learn about feminism, and I was starting to learn about like the waves of feminism. And I in particular had this one instructor who eventually became a member of my thesis committee when I was in grad school, who was hardcore second wave feminist. And she drove me up a tree because she was so embroiled in second wave feminism in a certain way that was not productive. Her classroom presence in some ways was very toxic. There were things that I got from it that were very helpful, but it was also, I recognize now, was a very kind of toxic dynamic. But she also had this like chip on her shoulder of like, gay men weren't nice to me when I was involved in politics in the 70s. And she like carried that forever. And so because of that experience, and before I like understood the history, I was like, oh, I imagine that like women like her just like complained of like, why is the L after the G? Why shouldn't? And I was like, that's such a dumb argument to have. That's not the reason why LGBT, why they flipped the L in front of the G. And once I learned that, I was like, I feel like I owe an apology to many people, even if I never said it to them out loud. Like most of the time it was just thoughts in my head. I was like, they still deserve like a muffin basket or whatever. I love all kinds of music that relates when I feel it, but those correlations won't fit a ton of people. Yeah. People are saying hello. Thank you. The reason why the L got switched to the front is because of the AIDS epidemic. In the 1980s, of course, so like, again, I sometimes forget that like people are younger than I am. And like now there's a lot of young people who don't understand the history of the AIDS epidemic. And I even like learned about it late because I grew up in North Dakota. You know, I was a kid in the 80s, so nobody was talking about AIDS. I mean, Reagan didn't mention AIDS until 1987. 7 years into his presidency. And so, like, when AIDS first was discovered, it was primarily affecting gay men. And there was so much misinformation. People didn't understand the disease. They didn't understand how it worked. They didn't understand how it was spread. There was all this fear and all of this paranoia. And basically what happened is that a lot of these gay men started going into hospitals and emergency rooms, and they were dying. And doctors and nurses, there were many, many doctors and nurses, people who took the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, would refuse to go into the rooms and like treat these patients. And so in many, many communities, it was lesbian women who would go and they would be nurses and they would bring food and they would sit and just hold people's hands while they were dying. And they nursed so many of these gay men who had been abandoned by their families, who had been absolutely discarded by society, wouldn't even be like, medical professionals wouldn't even treat them the way that they deserved. And so it was the lesbian community that came together and said, this is not right, and we are going to do this. Some of them were the only ones who would set foot into the room of an AIDS patient. So they would like confer with the medical professionals, and then they would bring the things into the room or like do what they needed to do. Some of them trained as nurses, and so that they could then go and do volunteer work and do all of this stuff and do the things that other medical professionals who took an oath were not willing to do. And that's why they got switched. So once I learned that, I was like, see, that's why we have to share our history and we have to talk about it, because I had no idea. I had no concept. I had no clue. And once I learned that, I was just like, why is that not taught in textbooks? Like, why is that not in like actual schools? Like, why is nobody actually learning that? And it's just, so that's why I think these pride chats are important. That's why I thought that this was, something that I wanted to do to like contribute during Pride, is that like all of this sort of history, we have to share it and we have to talk about it, because it's so important. It's so important to keep talking about this and, really be able to kind of, remember that history, because at that point, HIV and AIDS was a death sentence. I mean, once we get into the 90s, there are some early sort of treatment drugs. And of course, now we have different treatments and things that will put people into an undetectable status. Undetectable is equal to untransmissible. So if somebody is undetectable, they can't spread the virus to somebody else. There's PrEP, which is a, I always forget. Pre-exposure prophylaxis. But it basically just means that you can take this thing that blocks the virus from infecting you and is like 97% effective and things like that. So it's now much more of a chronic condition rather than a death sentence sort of illness. And a lot of people now, it's just part of their reality of like, oh, you can get on PrEP and like, if you happen to contract it, you can manage it through these different ways and all that. And it doesn't have the sort of weight that it had when people watched, entire swaths of their community die out. And so it's really interesting to see how there's a distance. And again, that's a kind of privilege. Like all of these rights that have been won have become this sort of privilege of people to not have to think about where it came from and where the history comes from and how all of these things sort of developed. Before we move on further, let me go ahead and, I'm weird. I like particle physics, and the one vagina I interacted with was attached to a very cute trans FTM person. I've always loved their company, but at the same time, did I like the sex? I don't know. I enjoyed like tons of aspects, and like, not to get into detail, enjoyed pleasing them, not myself. Do the same thing with the regular thing I enjoy, so I never really feel gay. It's all about, when we have these boxes, it becomes so limiting. And that's like for my own gender identity, I never felt like I found the right letter, right? Like we keep adding all these letters and there's new identities and new expressions and things. And that's why I kind of came out a few years ago as like uncomfortably non-binary, because when I look at what non-binary seems to be in the world, I'm like, well, that's closest, but it also doesn't feel quite right. I've always considered myself gender fluid as an aspect of my sexual experience, because I don't feel like explaining it beyond that. It's uncomfortable for me Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some people just, they're not into the labels. It's more about the experience, and it's like, let them figure it out. That's how I feel about pronouns. That's why I always, the whole thing, I understand why pronouns are important, and I absolutely, you should respect people's pronouns when they tell you their pronouns. But when people ask me my pronouns, I'm just like, I'm pronoun agnostic at this point, because I exist in so many different contexts where, like, obviously if I'm in drag and I'm presenting this sort of visage, she, her, obviously you should use she, her. Like, that's what I'm kind of putting out there. If you use they, them, I don't really care. When I'm at work, I have in my bio at work, I say they, them, he, him is kind of my, and if people just use he all the time because that's what they're comfortable with, I don't really care. For me, it's a low investment thing. Like, for me, the pronouns don't matter. For other people, it's absolutely crucial to their identity. With their transition, with their sort of social existence, having specific pronouns used to identify them and to refer to them is so important. And so then I always feel this extra pressure when I tell people that, like, I don't really care, you can use what, there's a lot of people who, even if they see me outside of drag, they call me Janessa, they use she, her pronouns, and I'm like, I'm fine with that. That works. He, him probably feels the least comfortable, the least like me, but I'm like, I'm not, my investment level is low, but then I feel this pressure to, like, explain to people, just because I feel that way doesn't mean that's an excuse for you to go to somebody else who has said, these are my pronouns, please respect them. Then you need to respect them. Like, I'm not here to, like, excuse somebody else, like, their kind of lazy bigotry or whatever, or misunderstanding or misconstrued or whatever it is. It's like, I'm not here to, like, placate that. I'm just telling you that I don't really care what pronouns you use. This one, they, them seems to fit the best. He, him seems to fit the least. Go to town. Whatever you do, I'm not going to get mad about it. Is first do no harm the same as actively heal, though, or just don't injure them worse? I think that if you are not doing your job to treat people, you are doing harm. I think that not actively healing people, not choosing to be part of that, I think that is doing harm. I don't think that, I'm not going to excuse that behavior. I'm not going to, because it comes from prejudice. It doesn't come from any sort of, because there was no science at the time. There was no science. And especially once you had, like, these women who were coming in and nursing people, none of them caught it. So it's like, even if we wanted to give them a little benefit of the doubt, which I don't, if they were like, oh, like, once you saw that, like, these women were coming in and volunteering and helping and nobody was getting sick, nobody was catching the virus, then if you're still choosing not to go into those rooms and not be helpful, then you're a shitty doctor and you should be called out for it. Not choosing not to heal is doing harm. I'm not going to give them an out on that. Some of it I've been willing to talk with you a little bit about and maybe, like, engage with it. That's not an idea I'm going to engage with. I just know if they choose not to do that, they're a shitty doctor and they should be run out of town on a big fat rail. But I love that you shared your opinion as well. Or just ask the question. Not that that's your opinion. I also don't want to speak for you and say that that's your opinion. But, like, I don't know. I'm not going to give them. I'm positive there must be doctors who... Oh, I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were of just, like, I'm not going to... It's the same as, like, pharmacists who, like, don't want to give out the abortion pill or don't want to give out the morning after pill or whatever. And it's like, do your fucking job. If you have all the... Like, you shouldn't be a pharmacist then. If you have issues with, I will give out this medication, I won't give out this medication, fuck you. If you just wanted to make money, go be a lawyer. They can pick and choose their clients however they want. You are a community service. A pharmacy is a community service. And if you're not willing to prescribe or give out, not prescribe, they don't prescribe, but if you're not willing to dispense abortion pills, morning after pills, PrEP, whatever it is, fuck you. Get out of that profession. You're a shitty human being. That's a hill I'll die on all day long. But mentally in other ways, I'm picking the, middle ground. Other people, describe yourself included. If they can ask, just refer to me as I present and I'll ignore it. I don't care. But if they want to identify me, that's sick. I feel great then. It's like, cool. Thanks for not asking, not saying, like, any particular thing feels sick. Yeah, for me, it's the only time that it becomes like a thing is, like, if I'm in drag and somebody uses he, you're going to get the big drag queen side eye, and they correct themselves real quick. They correct themselves real quick. Oh yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that there must be professionals who twist. I think there are, and I think we need to stop letting people get away with that. That's the other thing. I think I read this article that was talking about the power of bystanders, and that so much of what, like, when there's harassment, when there's street harassment, when there's catcalling, when there's bullying and like assaults and things like that, it's bystanders not getting involved. There are so many people who do it because they've never been called on it. And I understand that there's potential danger. I understand that there's all of these things, but like, the power of the bystander, because they think that they're in the right. And so they think that if I harass this person, it's because they're beneath me, they're lower than me, and everybody else agrees with me. And once a bystander who is not involved in that situation says, hey, fuck you and sit down, like, that a lot of times is enough to stop somebody, because it never entered their head that they weren't in the right, that they weren't correct, and that everybody around them didn't support them. That's why I wear a lot of times, like, right now I'm wearing a gym t-shirt, but like, sometimes I like to wear t-shirts that have little sassy sayings or little things to kind of challenge people, because I don't want people thinking that just because I look like this, just because I have the face of a potato face serial killer Midwestern. I mean, a couple times during quarantine, I gave myself the quarantine buzz cut. Oh my God, this potato face with a buzz cut? Are you kidding? That's like the recruiting poster for the KKK. That's what I look like. I understand what I look like. I understand the limitations. So I try to do things to signal, like, because people will just come up to you and say the most out-of-pocket, ridiculous things. And they just think that you're complicit. They think that they see, oh, another pasty white person, you must agree with everything that I think. Let me come up to you and just share my observations about the queer people or the brown people or the whatever people that are in our vicinity. And I like to absolutely put a fucking, like, foot on that and be like, not today, Satan. Like, absolutely not. Oh, it's so worse. That's not, yeah, I shouldn't have said it that way. That, not that it's your opinion, but that just the, like, that was your sort of idea to engage with, and I'm saying no. Not that you own that. So I didn't mean to make it sound like that was your that's your opinion, or that you believe that. Mine figured out both my boyfriends are my pharmacists since they left. It's gone to shade. Oh no. The doctors were scared and shitty people. Yeah. I just, and some of them were actively homophobic. Like, I think people sometimes don't understand that now there is such a certain level of acceptance, and there's enough, like, pockets of acceptance that, like, people don't realize that that wasn't always the way, that wasn't always how people behaved. And the level of homophobia and the virulence of the homophobia that was out there. And so, yeah, so I'm holding back some of my many healthcare professionals, and it's difficult. Let me tell you, I am a nightmare. I was in, and that's the thing, it was interesting when I got called to, like, speak to future medical professionals about, like, being a queer person in healthcare, because being a queer person in healthcare, I don't have any bad experiences related to that I can think of. All of my bad experiences are being a fat person in healthcare. And let me tell you, I'm just as mouthy about that, because I had, like, gotten a wound on my leg that wasn't healing and eventually got infected. I got cellulitis, and I ended up having to go into the hospital. And I had this doctor. I never go to the doctor. That's the problem, is that I never go to the doctor. So I've never developed, like, a relationship with doctors or whatever. So I just got whoever was the emergency room person became my doctor or whatever. So when I went into the hospital, this woman, she drove me fucking nuts. She drove me absolutely fucking nuts. And she was like, so I'm in there with a skin infection. Cellulitis is an infection of the skin. So it's basically what happens. It can happen, like, if you get wounds on your skin and they don't heal, because it's bacteria that already live on your skin that get inside your body. On the outside of your body, they do what they do. They're supposed to be there. They're great. If they get inside the body for too long, and if there's too many of them, you get this infection. So I'm in there for a skin infection. And so she came to see me, and I was there, and I'm like running a fever. I've got this infection. Like, I'm just run down and feeling terrible. And she was like, and I was supposed to, like, lay with my leg elevated. And I didn't know at this time that there apparently are, like, hospital beds that you can request. I don't know if our hospital has them or not, but that are made for bigger bodies and that have more padding and cushioning. And she thought that I should be, like, flat with my leg up. And I told her, I said, I can't do that. I said, this bed does not have enough padding. I said, if I lay like that, I can't walk, because when my back is just flat on this like plywood style bed with almost no cushioning, I was like, my back just seizes up. I was like, I have to be at an angle. And so I was like, so I get my leg up, but she's like, it has to be above your heart. It has to be all this stuff. I said, I can't do it. You have to come up with something else or whatever. And so I told her that I couldn't do this because it was hurting my back. Like, I couldn't lay like that. So then she was like, I think we should test you for sleep apnea. I was like, bitch, I'm telling you that this is happening when I'm awake. When I'm awake. This has nothing to do with when I'm sleeping. There's no indication that I have sleep apnea. There's nothing to do with sleep apnea. You're just looking at me, and I'm a fat person. So you're like, oh, fat person, probably can't breathe well. You probably have sleep apnea. So I was like, this has nothing to do with sleep apnea. I said, I'm in here for a skin infection. And I'm telling you that my back hurts if I lay on this bed I need cushioning on my back to keep it from seizing up. And she gives me this like sigh and this kind of patronizing look. And she starts explaining to me the potential problems that can come from undiagnosed sleep apnea. So I let her finish her little speech and I said, are you done now? And she's like, we can talk about this later. And I was like, maybe we should. Maybe you should go now. And the minute she left, I hit the call button and I got this nurse. And again, and I kept it together mostly while she was there. And then this poor little, I don't think she was a full nurse because she seemed really young. She might have been like a CNA or whatever. Like, I don't know what level she was at, but she was real young and kind of timid. And she came into the room and I just said, my doctor, who was just here, I don't want that bitch to ever set foot in this room. And she's just like, she just like froze, like, ah. And I said, is there a patient advocacy thing? Is there something? I was like, you need to get somebody in here now so that she never sets foot in this room again. And she's like, I'll see what I can do. And she like runs off. And I was like, and then I'm like collapsed back on the bed because that took like all the energy that I had at that moment. And so then they did have a patient advocacy thing. And this is how, like, again, there's so much fat phobia and some of the like systems that we have just don't address certain things. Because then she comes, she's like, yes, you can fire your doctor. She referred to it as firing your doctor. She's like, we haven't done it for a while, so I don't really know the process. Let me look into it and let me find out. So she goes off and then she comes back and she's like, well, I have not great news. I was like, what? And she's like, apparently the hospital's policy is that if you want to dismiss your current doctor, your doctor gets to pick their replacement. What? I've just told you that I don't want this bitch to ever set foot in my room again, and now you're telling me that she gets to pick her own replacement. And she's like, yeah, we're not going to do that. She's like, we're not going to do that. She's like, I'm going to do some digging, and I'm going to find some recommendations that you can look into who are more supportive, who have better reviews or whatever, for your aftercare. But she's like, how about, I'll find out who's the like attending physician in the ER right now, and we'll just have them assigned to your case. Because that's what happened when you first came in, is you got assigned to her and she became your doctor. And I was like, that sounds fine. So then I got this new guy. There was some other like fat phobic stuff that happened, and I was going to replace him. And then she came in and she's like, we can do that. I'm 100% here to support you. She's like, here's the deal. This guy, she's like, what he said to you is unacceptable. But she's like, he's also really trying to get you out of the hospital. And I know that that's what you want. Because I was ready to go. I was done being there. I was like, get it wrapped up, get it whatever, get me the medications and get me the fuck out of here. She's like, he's also really like determined to like get you released quicker. So I was like, okay. So I stuck with him. He was off because when he came in, the first time he met me, he came in and like didn't even, he's like, hey, whatever. And he starts looking at my chart that has my information. And he just like, to make conversation, he goes, how is your diabetic meal plan going? And I was like, what? I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, like, are the diabetic meals okay? And I was like, I'm not getting diabetic meals because I don't have diabetes. And he looks at me and he says, oh, I just assumed you would have. Can you imagine how if I was not feverish, I might have thrown hands with this man? Like, he was old. I could have pushed him down. I could have overpowered him, but not with a fever and not in that condition. So I was just like, what the fuck? I was like, how about we get back to what I'm here for? And so then we talked about that. And so then I immediately was like, get that patient advocate back in here. And I told her the whole situation. And she's like, I'll file a complaint. She's like, we can replace him, but here's the situation. He wants to get you out of here. And I was like, that I can get behind. So yeah, so that, and then they got me. So, let's finish the story and then I'll get back. I know I have to scroll back up because there's been quite a few comments. So then they got me a new doctor for the aftercare. So Mr. Diabetic Meal Plan, this bitch that wanted me to get tested for sleep apnea, they all had the same chart that this new doctor had. And there'd been all kinds of blood work and all this kind of stuff. And I go into this aftercare appointment. I'm in there for less than 5 minutes. He's looking at my chart and he's like, do you know that you're low on iron? Do you know that you're anemic? And I was like, no, what do you mean? He's like, your iron levels are super low and you're missing like 20% of the blood that should be in your body because of your iron levels. He's like, that's why your wound's not healing, is because you're anemic and you don't have enough blood. And so it's not circulating enough to heal this wound. He's like, so we need to do like some wound care on it and we need to get you on an iron supplement so that you can like actually heal this wound. He had the same information that those other two had. And they couldn't even be bothered to look at the chart and notice. They ordered all that blood work. They're the ones who ordered it. And they didn't even look at it. They just went with like, what do fat people have? Diabetes and sleep apnea. And so like this whole issue was the fact that I was missing like a bunch of blood from my body and it wasn't replenishing because I was too low on iron. And I was like, you figured that out? I was like, is this some new thing? Like, he's like, no, this is just your information from your hospital stay. And I was like, and then I was feeling better, so I was ready to like burn something down, but I didn't. And so that's the kind of thing where I'm like, that's where it's important to like listen to people about how their identities matter. Because when I go into any sort of healthcare situation, I'm not even thinking about how they're going to treat queer people. I'm thinking about how they treat fat people, and I'm listening. I'm ready for any like sliver of an idea that they might be fat phobic because I'm ready to like throw hands. Like I wouldn't actually hit somebody, but verbally throw hands. So now that we finished that, let me go back up and see what I've missed. Let's see here. I think the boy when it was 06 sucked this opinion, give him his heart meds now. Since they left town, my allergy meds got canceled. Oh no! That's the worst, allergy meds. Oh, I should get on something for allergies. It gets worse every year. Like I used to talk about like allergy seasons because it used to affect me really like in spring and fall. And now it's just like allergies all year long. It's not good. But I don't go do doctor things because I have terrible experiences. I'm tracking now. No, yes, good. I'm glad, CJ, because I didn't mean to say that was actually your opinion. Truth. I agree that if you call people out on their bullshit, they usually, yes, absolutely. The power of the bystander. And they were talking about some things. They're like, yes, sometimes it leads to unsafe situations. That's something to be aware of. That's something to be aware of, like what the dynamics are, like who's there, all this kind of stuff. But like a lot of times all it takes is for a bystander because they think that everybody is on their side. And most of the time people are not. They're like, that's a fucking asshole. And so if one bystander gets involved, if it escalates, other people start getting involved and it becomes very quick. They realize very quickly that they should have backed down if they didn't already back down. Absolutely. It's very serious and can lead to sepsis and death. Yeah, cellulitis, it's not good. It was not good. Oh God, the patronizing sigh. Yes. The way, and she like did and like the head tilt, and I was like, I want to karate chop your fucking neck. Oh, so inflammation for sure, making your back just rigid and stressed on top of the bowl. Yeah, it was just like, because it's just like if you lay on plywood. I have the same trouble with massage tables. Like I love a good massage. I can't really go and get massages anymore because as a big person, like if I lay on a flat massage table, they've just got that thin bit of padding. It's not padded enough, and so like the way my spine sits on there, I can barely get up from the table. Like it's bad. When my grandfather was in and out of the hospital, me or my husband had to be there all the time or they would have let him die. Yeah. there are a lot of great people in healthcare. There are a lot of great people in healthcare, and I recognize that some of the shitty treatment that happens is also because of the corporate structure of hospitals and all. Like, I get that it's not just the healthcare professionals, but there are some people who go into healthcare that probably shouldn't because they don't really give a shit about human beings, and fuck those people. I work in healthcare, and it is so. I'm glad that you are there because you are somebody who cares about human beings. So, I bet it's hard to work through. I bet it's a difficult situation. But first physician after a referral who requested to get on E, she says, "No, we will test your testosterone, and if it is low, I will give you something to fix it." There's something about doctors, how they're just not responsive. There are certain doctors that, like, it offends them if you have any sort of like opinion or any sort of thought about what's wrong with you or your body and your experience. And like, they're like, I'm the professional, I'm the master of all the knowledge. And they're so offended if you like, I know what I need. I know what I need. That's how, when I used to go to, when I was in college, when we had student health and it was basically free except for medications, I used to go to the doctor more often, obviously, because it was free. And what I loved about, there were two doctors at student health, Dr. Christensen and Dr. Heinley. And Dr. Heinley was the one that you went to if you wanted, like, you wanted the real information. Like, he was always like gonna give you the real shit. Like, he was not gonna talk over you, he was not gonna talk down to you. He was just gonna be like, this is what's going on, let's take care of it, let's do all this kind of stuff. And then Dr. Christensen, I'm sure, was a fine doctor or whatever, but he was the one that you went to if you wanted to look at a beautiful man and try a new pill. Yeah, so sometimes I would go to Dr. Christensen because there was like, every once in a while, I used to like want to try more pills. I was like, since I've got this like student health service, I should try some things and see if they work. And I never had like great experiences because one time, like, I decided I wanted to try Ambien because I had a friend from high school who was struck by lightning and died. And obviously that caused a lot of stress. She was somebody who I, cared for very much. And it was kind of the first, like, death of somebody in my age group that I experienced. And so I was having trouble sleeping. And so I was like, I'll just make an appointment with Dr. Christensen. And I went in and I was just like, here's the deal. I was like, I'm going through this stress. I was like, I just want to try. Can I try like 7 days? Like 7 days of Ambien? Like, I feel like if I get back on a sleep schedule, I was like, I feel like that will help, but right now, like, I cannot sleep and it's destroying my life. Like, I cannot sleep. It's terrible. And so he's like, yeah, we can do that. Let's get you 7 of them or whatever. So I got and I tried it and it was horrible and I hated it. That's another reason why anytime I have tried like medications and things like that, they're always awful. And it was terrible because they tell you, like, make sure you have a solid 8 hours to sleep. And one time I like took one and then realized I still had something to do, trying to fight through an Ambien. Jesus, that was the worst experience of my life. I'm just like, I gotta get this done. And then, like, when they say you are gonna sleep for 8 hours, you're gonna fucking sleep for 8 hours. You're lucky if you wake up after 8 hours. It was terrible. I hated it. And then at one point, like, I was going to a counselor at the student like counseling center, and she wanted me to try a like antidepressant, and so she gave me Wellbutrin. And so I went to Dr. Christensen and I was like, I've got this little, I've got a recommendation for Wellbutrin. Hopefully you can hook me up. And he was like, yeah, sure. And so, like, because I don't remember. I don't think she was able to like prescribe. I forget how it all worked, but she could prescribe because she did prescribe it. I'm kind of fuzzy on it because she sent me down or whatever. And then, like, because what it was is that she was like, you can either get a prescription, like I can get a prescription, we can send you down to Dr. Christensen. Because I think I had to see the doctor. So I think maybe she like could make a recommendation, but she couldn't actually prescribe it. It's so much detail that doesn't matter. But like, so I went down and she's like, or there's this like place in Grand Forks that if you go there, they keep like sample packets so you can get it for free and you won't have to pay for it. But to do that, you'll have to see this other doctor as well. So like, we'll still have our sessions. And I went to one session with that guy and I got my like free couple samples or whatever. And he was so creepy and weird that I went back and I was like, I'll pay for it. I was like, let's not ever do that again. And then I tried it for a little while and I didn't like that either. That Wellbutrin, It kind of worked. And I found out later, it's really interesting because our school does aviation. And so with aviation, you can't become a pilot if you have any sort of history of like depression medication, because they're worried that you're going to fly into the ground or whatever. Like you're going to be depressed and kill a whole plane full of people or whatever. But so what that means is that they have this whole like range of people who aren't treating their mental illness because they don't want to lose their career prospects. That makes me more frightened than having a pilot who's on antidepressants. So Wellbutrin is something that they would give to them and just hope that it worked, because Wellbutrin was used for mental health, like antidepressant kind of medication, but its primary use was for smoking cessation. So then all of these people who were training to become pilots, they would just write a prescription saying for smoking cessation, give them Wellbutrin, and then they just had to hope that that worked, because that's the one that they could get on that wouldn't fuck up their chances of being a pilot. I would like, once I found that out, like I felt less safe in the skies, because I was like, there's a bunch of untreated fucking mental illness just like running rampant through this, and they won't treat it because they know they'll lose their license. It's horrible, horrible. Let me go back up again. I get, let's see. Yeah, to fix it. You should have allergy testing. I know I should. There's a lot of things I should do. But I'm kind of like a 1980 Chevy Citation at this point. Like there's so many things wrong that if I went in, we don't have the budget or the time to fix it. So I just keep driving and hope if I put a little oil in from time to time that it'll be okay. It was infuriating and honestly humiliating. Yeah, that's the other thing, is you're so vulnerable when you go to the doctor. Like these people need to have so much more training on just like being human beings, some of them, because it's like you are at your most vulnerable. And like I'm lucky, I guess, that I was willing to fight back and fire that horrible bitch doctor that I had, because how many people has she pulled that kind of shit with who didn't feel comfortable or who were too sick or too tired to like fight or try to get proper representation? It makes me enraged. I've heard the word fix in reference to being trans more than once, and I do not like that. Agreed. Absolutely agreed. That would be a throw hands moment as well. These are all very intense stories about healthcare, the chat and everyone. Yeah. I wish everybody better healthcare experiences. I hope that advocate for yourself. I know that it's hard. I know that it's vulnerable. I know that it's an icky situation. Advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to get a little up in their business. I've avoided doctors, etc. for a long, long time. Wanted advice recently and realized they just are in it for the coin. Some of them are, absolutely. Some of them are. And it's so hard to figure out. There should be like an audition process for your doctor. Like you should be able, because there's times where I'm like, I don't want to pay, even if my insurance is going to pay or pay part of it or whatever. I don't want to pay for an appointment with somebody that I find out is an asshole. If I had known that that woman that I was going to get attached to because she was the one working the ER, no, there should be a way to like audition and like have a free meeting or whatever. Hey Tanya, how's it going? Hello. Hello, people are saying hello. You've been on Wellbutrin, Celexa, Exafor, Abilify. Yeah, I just am not, medication. That was the problem with Wellbutrin, was that I'm not good at keeping to a schedule. And so Wellbutrin, when I was on it, and because it was like a 3 times daily, which I like to sleep in, and so trying to figure out like how to get it so there was 3 perfectly timed, because if I missed a dose, and I know they always say with like antidepressants you have to build it up and it's like this whole thing. That wasn't necessarily the experience that I had. Like I did feel like it got better as I went on, but if I missed a dose, I was crying in traffic because the light turned red. Like I was a mess. And so like if I missed a dose, 1 dose, I would be like driving to school and I'd be like running behind. I was late for class or whatever. And, and I would hit a red light and just like sob in the car, or like a song would come on the radio and I was just crying all the time. Because then anytime it started to like fall back down again, my emotional, and so I told her, I was like, I have to get off this. I was like, I can't. I was like, I like the effect that it's having, like when I stick with it, but I was like, I can't. And so she's like, do you want to try something else? And I was like, not right now. I was like, this was too much. And so I've always thought that if I was going to do something like that, I have to do like a once a day. There has to be something that I can take once a day so that I can just set it for a time that I know I will be awake and just be able to take it once and then be done. It was bad. My doses were always once per day, and I take it whenever. Sometimes I skip a day, but you'll feel it as the level. Yeah, that Wellbutrin 3 times a day did not work for me. It did not. Hooked on phonics did not work for me. We've kind of strayed all over the place, but yeah, so that's it. And we've kind of talked about all the stuff. We talked about kind of the history of activism and all of that stuff where like conservative white gays are starting to come out and ruin things for people again. Absolutely still a thing. The get along gays are still here. So it's definitely a problem. I did say I was going to circle back in terms of like sexuality, because in terms of sexuality, I am strictly dickly, pretty much. Even as a kid, this is before I was even out. So let me tell you about my first girlfriend. My first girlfriend I met through speech, and she lived in Mohall, which is a town about 36 miles away. And I had a driver's license, and I had a little Chevy Citation. And so I would drive sometimes to Mohall, or I would see them at speech meets and things like that. And so she and I were kind of dating, and it was very cute. And I decided I had to break up with her after we had our first kiss. Like, it was too weird. And so it was after we had competed in this like community volleyball tournament in Sherwood, another little small town. So I was in this friend group that was in like I was in Bowbells, and they were mostly in like Mohall and Sherwood and Lansford, this little circle of little small towns. And so it was after we had played in this volleyball tournament and lost terribly. And so we went back to our friend Shannon's house, and Shannon had this, so like her house, the living room, kitchen, dining room was kind of like an O. And so there was a wall in the middle, and there was like a door and a door. And so it was my girlfriend at the time, Mari, and then our friends Shannon and Stacy. And so they're like, why don't we go back to Shannon's house and watch a movie? And I was like, okay, or whatever. And so Shannon pulls out Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. This was the 90s. And of course, the big ballad from that is Bryan Adams, Everything I Do It For You. And so Shannon pops the tape into the VCR, and weirdly enough, it opens at the credits playing the Bryan Adams song. And all of a sudden, Stacy and Shannon get up and like run out the 2 doors and shut them. And I was like, what is happening? And I run to the one door, and I was like, they've got it locked. And Mari comes up next to me, and she's like, oh, are we alone in here? And I was like, I should check the other door. I mean, I'm clearly like, this is so funny. Like, looking back now, it's like, oh, little closeted gay boy, like not sure what to do. So I'm like, I should check the other door. And I run to the other door and like check that one, and it's locked. And she comes up next to me, and she grabs me and just like kisses me or whatever. And then afterwards she's like, sorry. And I was like, no, it's okay. And then that day I decided I had to break up with her. I didn't know why, but I knew that it was not right. And so would not be facing the reason why it wasn't right for several more years. But she lived in Mohall. I lived in Bowbells. And this was the 90s. This was before, much of the internet. This was early 90s. And so the internet wasn't as much of a thing. Email wasn't really a thing. We didn't have cell phones. And so I used to write a lot of letters to people. So I decided to break up with her in a letter. And I wrote my letter on neon popsicle stationery. Popsicle stationery. I had a whole collection of stationery. Oh no, yes, CJ, it was, oh no, cringe, absolutely cringe. Yeah, everything I do, that song was ruined for me. Oop, that is the best. Yes, thank you, Surprise Pet Cat. It was quite. And so I wrote, so somehow, it never occurred to anybody like, this one might be gay. This one, we think Mari's boyfriend might be gay. It was too early for that. Like, it was too early. I was maybe eccentric. I was a little bit weird. I was unconventional, but like I had been the gay kid in my school as long as I was around. Like, I just was always, people clued in pretty quickly. Although even then, when I was outed later in my freshman year of high school, then people were like, is it true? And it's like, you've been calling me a fag since I was 5 years old. Fuck off. Like, what's wrong with you? But so then I wrote her on neon popsicle stationery. And apparently I broke her heart. I broke her heart. And I did feel really bad. And it was so dumb. It was so dramatic. But we became friends again. I went to a Mohawk school dance and we talked. That was a big thing. I don't know if kids still do that, but we always had like, I was like, we have to talk. We have to talk. We need to go on a walk and talk. I need to talk to you. And it was always this like people separating off, and then you would go and talk to somebody else, and then this person would talk to this person, and like it was wild. I love that. I mean, poor girl, but the stationery sounds awesome. Yeah, I don't know who could open that letter and not be like, this is a class A faggotry kind of move. This boy is gonna be in show business. That's somebody should have clued in on that, but it was a different time. It was a different time. Oh, poor girl, but that station, yeah, oh good. Yeah, we did. Do you remember what you wrote? I don't remember. I came up with some bullshit excuse of like, it was too intense and I didn't feel like I was ready to be with somebody. So I had like I had 2 girlfriends in high school, very short term. And then I had one girlfriend the first summer, for just a couple weeks, for the first summer that I was in Medora. So I did this summer work thing in Medora, which is like our tourism destination. So like until I went to college and finally came out, I had 3 very short-term girlfriends. And that was the kind of thing, is I found the ones who were a little bit crazy, and I'm a little bit crazy. So like immediately was like crazy meets crazy. Ooh. And then it would start to get like more intense. And then I would just break out and be like, oh, that was too crazy. I can't be with anybody. I can't be with anyone. And that was how I kind of got through it, was just like being like, oh, I can't. That was too traumatic. It was too much. It hurt my heart. I have to be single. And it was really like, I didn't have the words to be like, I don't want to date any of these young ladies. If any of the young men would like to jump in, we could talk about it. But no. It was very... So yeah, I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I came up with some sort of thing. I mean, it was the very like, it's not you, it's me. It was that kind of thing. Yeah, but the why of it was below board. Yeah, it was really just kind of a like, I can't, it's too intense or whatever. And yeah, it was bad. And then, so this is the story. I'm going to tell this because she never told me this, but our friends Stacy and Shannon, the next time I saw them, they're like, you really hurt Mari. And I was like, I know, I'm sorry. I hope we can all... Do you know what Mari did? We're starting to get the spinny thing, so we might wrap it up pretty soon. But they're like, do you know what Mari did? And I was like, no. And they're like, she tried to kill herself. Sit with this for a moment. Wait till the end of the story. But they're like, and I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? Like, that's terrible. I was like, I never wanted that to happen. And I was like, should we go find her? Like, what she did... She went to her room and she went and got a towel in the bathroom and like wet it and then like wrapped it on, like put it on her head, like over her face, and went and laid down on the bed because she thought she would drown. I'm not trying to make fun of anybody's pain. But I was like, they told me that and I'm like, she did what? I was like, you're trying to make me feel bad. I was like, she put a wet bath towel over her face. They're like, she could have died. And I was like, I don't think she could. I was like, I'm no scientist. I'm not a woman in STEM, but I don't think she could actually. I was like, I don't think that's real. I don't know. I don't think she could have. And so eventually I was like, okay, so it's not that serious. I was like, and so, yeah, so that was the only thing. That was the like, the attempt or whatever. And I was just like, a wet bath towel. I don't even think she even like wrapped it tight around her head. She just like laid it over her face and thought she would drown. Dodged a bullet. It also dodged a bullet because I'm gay. Who was sucking dick on the side. When did I finally realize? I came out in my first year of college. I grew up in a little tiny town and I had to move to the big. So when I moved to Grand Forks for college, that's when I had my whole like coming out process and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I had to get out of town. And luckily I came out before I realized that Grand Forks is not a big city. It felt like a big city then. And so I felt like anything's possible. You can be anybody you want to be. And then I was like, oh, I should have maybe learned more about this place. I'm having so many cringy memories. Oh no, oh my God. Yeah, it was a little ditzy, not a well thought out plan. Yeah, it was wild. But yeah, we should probably wrap it up because now it's starting to do the spinny thing again. That's my cue to like knock it off. Thank you everybody for coming to this Pride Chat. I really appreciate all of you. And don't forget to come back next Wednesday, the 10th. We will be back here again at 7 p.m. Central. I think I scheduled... I'm going to make sure that I go back and I'm going to reschedule them all to 7 p.m. Central. 7 p.m. Central on Wednesdays. And so, yeah, definitely make sure you watch out for that. Next week is going to be horror movies. We're going to talk about horror movies and like the history of horror literature and queerness and all that kind of fun stuff. So if you're into horror movies and horror literature and all that kind of stuff, then definitely stop by and check it out. We're going to have a good time, 7 p.m. Central. Let's see if I remember my outro. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Don't forget, if you are here in live chat, to circle back around and leave a comment. Don't forget to help me feed the beast, help me feed the algorithm. I will do what I can to make sure that this goes public. I need to check the other one to see if that one's public. I'm so frustrated with this whole situation, but... So yeah, so definitely circle back around. Replay crew, we already know that you rock. You are fantastic. So leave your comments with your thoughts down below about all this crazy stuff, all this politics and my weird stories. Leave your comments down below. While you are down there, don't forget that you can give me that thumbs up to tell me that you appreciated this video, that you like these live chats, or if you're like, girl, this is Pride, we got other things to do, we want to do Molly and go to a circuit party, give me that thumbs down. It is all engagement. The algorithm isn't a picky bitch, and neither am I. And while you're... Excuse me, pretty girl. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, become part of the family, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I do an upload. I try really hard to make sure I have at least one video or live per week. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're very lucky, you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, if you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my website, just pretend it's there, The World of Champagne at JanessaJ.com. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry for all the spinning. I'm going to do my best to make this public so that you can leave comments. I'll check on last week's to see if that got effed up again. I'm so sorry about it. I'm so sorry that YouTube just fights me. Yes, there weren't any trolls tonight, which is good. But also bad because maybe they're not sending out lives as much as they used to. So I don't love that because that's kind of how we've been growing the channel for the last few months. So sometimes I don't mind the trolls because it means that it's going out to like a wider audience. But yeah, so hopefully don't forget to thumbs up, don't forget to comment, all that kind of good stuff. And until I see you again, bye.